Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and joining me, of course, is Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, have you just about recovered from arguably the most boring Manchester derby we've ever seen yesterday?
I have. It was dreary. It was dull. It was all the. I mean, the good thing about the word derby is that there are so many words that also begin with D. If you want to go with the alliteration to describe a game as bad as that, it was so drab, and it wasn't without its positives for United, so which we'll get into at least. But it really, yeah, it was. Sometimes it was so unmemorable that it could turn out being memorable just because everyone remembers how just what a dreadful level of quality it was. I mean, the fact that Joshua Zirkzee was doing some ball juggling before he was coming on, I mean, that was more interesting than most of the ball work that went on during the actual game.
Well, on today's show, myself and Samuel are going to reflect the best we can on that game at Old Trafford yesterday. Not that it requires much reflection given how poor it was, but we'll do our best nonetheless. And we'll also have a little look ahead to the big game on Thursday night, the trip to Lyon in the first leg of that Europa League quarter-final. But starting with yesterday, Samuel, you've already given it a bit of a summary there. It really was a game to forget and not one that fans of either side are going to look back on with an awful lot of fondness in years to come.
When I left last night, it was about 8:15, and as I was emerging from the Munich tunnel, Darren Fletcher was coming out of the Stretford End tunnel, and he was saying goodbye to some, I presume, some like family or friends that he knew, and he asked the kids, this couple's children, whether they'd enjoyed the game, and they were very enthusiastically said yes. And I thought, bless them. It's after watching that game and to have still enjoyed it. That's the innocence of youth. That there will have been a hell of a lot of people who did not enjoy that game. I think that the 2 children who were leaving Old Trafford yesterday were very much in the minority. And unfortunately, in terms of the sit-in protest, it clearly had an impact on that, because had United won against Manchester City, almost every supporter would have been there until the final whistle, and a hell of a lot more supporters would have stayed for the sit-in protest. So even the game had a knock-on effect in terms of the numbers of that. I know it's a strange thing to say, but I think that the weather probably didn't help either, in that it did feel like one of those end-of-season games that you see quite often in the Premier League between teams that have little or nothing to play for, excuse me, in the run-in, which isn't true of City, of course, because I think by the time a lot of people listen to this, they'll be 6th in the Premier League table and not occupying one of the Champions League places. But people just presume that they will sleepwalk to a top 5 finish and get into the Champions League again next season. United, it feels like they're destined to be marooned in 13th between now and the final game against Aston Villa in 6 or 7 weeks' time, whenever that may be. And I think we said in the build-up to it that it was the most inconsequential derby in nearly 20 years. And some of us were a little desperately yesterday thinking in the build-up to the game, well, maybe that can work to the game's advantage, that it can just be carefree football and both teams can play with abandon. You sometimes get that mad final day score, don't you? In a game which isn't on telly, that nobody was planning to watch, and it turns out to be like 8-1 to Middlesbrough, as it was at the time in 2008. But we were just never going to get that yesterday. It started promisingly enough with that charge from Garnacho, and I think for the game there needed to be a goal there. because then United had something to hang on to. It would have fueled the atmosphere. City would have had to play a lot more expansively, but we didn't get a goal. United, again, for the second game running, didn't score, yet City were by far and away the more toothless side. I was pretty staggered at how bad City were. I didn't understand Guardiola picking 530 somethings in the team, most of them in the midfield area, and all four of them pretty much midfielders. Depending on your definition, in Gundogan, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, and Mateo Kovacic. City didn't create a chance, at least United. And I was not a fan of the lineup Amorim put out. I looked at it and I thought, there are 8 defensive players in that starting 11, which is far too many. And that has been a recurring issue with Amorim's lineups. But United actually were the more attack-minded of the two teams, and they did have the best chances. And there are some progressive steps they're taking, and they do seem to be playing in the image of what Amorim would have hoped, and that there is a passing resemblance, minus the goals, to what Sporting were able to conjure up under Amorim. But the results are not going to come for United until, as far as the league is concerned, that is, they're not going to come until the start of next season, because they don't have the players to get results to even get into the top half of the table, never mind the top 4 or 5.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there, and I remember actually you submitting it as a blog post when the team news dropped, that just how sort of defensive minded the 11 was. And that was obviously impacted by Casemiro starting alongside Manuel Ugarte in the 2 holding midfield positions. Most of us would have anticipated Bruno Fernandes starting next to Ugarte and continuing their partnership. Were you surprised to see Fernandes start as the number 10 and not in that number 8 position?
Not surprised, and certainly early on, you could see why he was playing up there, in that he was coordinating the press. He was telling Garnacho where to go. He was telling Højlund where to go. When you've got a player like Fernandes who can run at full pelt and has that durability to almost run at that pace or that level of intensity for 90 minutes, then there is a hell of a lot of logic to playing him that high up. And he's played most of his career at United, certainly in the final third of the pitch, and he is one of the best pressers in that team. He's always going to harry opponents. He's always going to look to close them down. If you were to try and do that with Mason Mount, he would probably last 15 minutes and then break down, and it's out for the rest of the season. He doesn't have that durability, and whether he ever will remains to be seen. And even if he is to showcase it, I have my doubts it will happen this season, because he has been back in training for nearly 4 weeks now. Okay, one of those weeks United had off because it was the international break, and for a good portion of the second week as well, players had downtime to prepare and just try and recharge the batteries ahead of the run-in. So there was logic in playing Fernandes there, but as I've said before, you pick a goalkeeper, you pick 3 centre backs. That's already 4 defensive-minded players. You do not need 4 more defensive-minded players. And I get with Dorgu, it's a bit of a grey area, because he's been bought as a winger. It's quite clear he's playing on the left wing. But he is a left back by trade. Diogo Dalot is a right back by trade. He is becoming a bit better in that role as a winger, and that's what they've got to be. They've got to be wingers, and it does bode well that the 2 best chances yesterday for United came from Dalot's cross for Garnacho and Dorgu's cross for Zirkzee. And it was similar at Forest. Dorgu picked out Maguire for the header, which he couldn't quite connect with cleanly. And the chance where he had it cleared off the line, that came from Dalot teeing up Mazraoui, another full back, to cross to the far post. So that's what you'd hope to get from a fully functioning Amorim side, with obviously the key difference of someone putting the ball in the back of the net, which United just almost always struggle or fail to do. And look, Casemiro cropped up. I wasn't in Amorim's press conference yesterday because I did the mix zone. and observed some of the protesting that was going on afterwards. But Casemiro was brought up afterwards. And I think some people are starting to get hoodwinked that there's some mini revival going on there when there isn't. He's had 2 good games against a Spanish team, a sedate Spanish side, I should add as well, who played well for about 30 minutes out of 180 minutes against United. And he was able to keep up against Manchester City because their team was overloaded with 30-somethings, players of similar age profile to him with similar mileage on the clock. And I spotted a clip of a City goal at Old Trafford yesterday that one of the accounts had brought up because it was Derby Day. And it was actually City's second goal from the Old Trafford derby last season when the ball went to the far post and Erling Haaland headed it in, just cushioned it over Andre Onana. And the way City played that sequence, the pace of it, the slickness of it, that was City in their pomp. And I looked at that and thought, my God, is that only from last season? That is how drastic the drop-off has been for City. The only recognisable thing about them yesterday was the colour of their shirts. De Bruyne, who's been the best player in the Premier League the past 10 years, absolutely ghosted through the game yesterday. Foden has had possibly his worst season at City. It feels like Bernardo Silva looks a spent force. Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne are 2 of the best visiting players I've ever seen at Old Trafford, and they probably always will be. They have done a number on United so many times, and they have toyed with United so many times as well at Old Trafford. So it's quite striking to see them really labour against United yesterday, and not just any United side, but the worst United side in half a century. It got to the point where City fans were singing, "Come on, City, i.e., like, come and buck your ideas up. You're up against the 13th place side in the league here." So they clearly weren't impressed by what they were seeing. United fans, there was some impatience at Andre Onana not getting the ball out quickly enough, which I don't think really helps anybody. And I think there's a lack of understanding there at times. It's, if you want to lose patience with someone, it should possibly be someone at the other end of the pitch, given how few goals United are scoring. But in the end, I think Gary Neville complained about it, didn't he? How sanguine both sets of players and staff were at full time. It was billed as the most inconsequential derby in 20 years, and it really did live up to the billing, unfortunately for us.
Yeah, and I suppose those that did tune into Super Sunday were probably relieved that the first game that preceded it was a little bit better between Fulham and Liverpool with 5 goals in that one. But some of you mentioned there about the goal scoring issues. I've looked at some of the numbers. It's now 12 Premier League games United have failed to score in this season. Only Leicester and Everton have failed to score in more. And then at home, United have failed to score in 6 of their 16 home league games. Only Leicester have failed to score in more home games, which is only marginally at 7. So scoring goals, obviously, as we know, we've talked about it all season long, is a big problem. There was quite a few moments in the first half where Ruben Amorim was having to give pointers to Rasmus Højlund, telling him where to position himself. Sky put a graphic up sort of 25 minutes, think, into the first half, showing just how deep his sort of average position was. This is where the problem lies, isn't it, for Manchester United? They haven't got anybody, even though creativity hasn't been the best, they haven't got a permanent supply line where Højlund is positioned in the right spots.
You can blame John Murtough and Richard Arnold for not going for Harry Kane and blunting United's attack for at least 2 years, because that is exactly what they did. You cannot blame John Murtough and Richard Arnold for Rasmus Højlund dropping too deep, or in the case of the chance for Ugarte when Fernandes clipped the ball over the top for him and he mishit the volley, Højlund being outside the penalty area. And we've spoken about this so often. His movement off the ball is dreadful. His inability to win duels is also dreadful. And there's a reason why any functioning striker with a profile that would seemingly appeal to United, whether it's a player who played under Ruben Amorim or whether it's a player who Jason Wilcox saw in and watched closely at the Manchester City Academy, is going to come into their thinking for the summer. Because I said it to a friend a while ago, and I'd probably still stand by it. You could argue that every Premier League club, apart from Southampton, has a better striker or / goal scorer than United. Even Jamie Vardy, who his race is run, he's over the hill. You would probably, in terms of like when it comes to scoring goals, you'd probably back him more than Højlund. And Ty said it a long time ago. The more you watch Højlund, you think Zirkzee should start. Then you watch Zirkzee and you think Højlund should start. And you're just going round and round in circles because neither of them are good enough to be the Man United number 9. And the dilemma they've got is that they've spent a hell of a lot of money on both of them. I think one of them absolutely has, at least one of them has got to go in the summer. I still, even though his approval ratings have been higher than Højlund's this calendar year, to the point he's almost like a cult figure, I would still argue that should be Zirkzee, because I don't see how he fits into that team when it's been strengthened in the summer. Even as a squad player, he jars too much with it. He's a player for isolated periods, and he's been getting by recently because he has to. They've not had any choice but to play him, and also it has been their good fortune that they drew a team in the Europa League who were really not very stiff opposition whatsoever, and Real Sociedad, and Sociedad underperformed quite badly in both of those ties. But next season, if you're signing an attacker, because they need another playmaker to play behind the striker, if you've got one of them, if you've got Ahmad, Garnacho, Mount, if Mainu is there and he can play there, of course, Fernandes can play there. There's not really room for Zirkzee. You don't really need Zirkzee, but you will need an alternative striker. And that's where Højlund, that is what Højlund should always have been at United. He is a support striker at best. He is not a starting striker. I found it quite baffling that they gave him the number 9 in the summer. It was completely predictable because it had been vacated by Anthony Marshall, and you want to show faith in the long-term number 9 that you've invested big money in. But you also leave yourself open to ridicule there, because as decent as Højlund's first season was, and it was, he's never ever looked like, apart from that purple patch in February, and look, it was a purple patch last year, he's never looked like consistently being the man to lead the United line for the long term. Manchester United need a striker who you can look at and you think he's either great now or he's going to be great. And I mean, you look at Romelu Lukaku, who they're absolutely right to sell after 2 years. He didn't want to be there either, and obviously he's been a very itinerant footballer throughout his career. But his goals record starts to, well, you look at it now, you think, Christ, he was a great signing. Why did they get rid of him after 2 years? Which is not doesn't tell the story whatsoever. But that's how bad United's striker situation is. You look at Romelu Lukaku and you almost get wistful about him just because of his goals record. I think it was 28 in the first season and something like 15 the second season. Like, his second season was really, really poor, and he didn't want to be at United for a third season, and they cashed in, of course. But in terms of goal scoring prowess, is Højlund ever going to get near to the volume of goals Lukaku has got throughout his career? No chance. No chance. And Lukaku, by the way, is an extremely flawed footballer, as we all know, we've all seen, and there's a lot of stats padding that goes on. But the guy does bang them in. He's a goal scorer. There are a lot of things Lukaku isn't, but he is a goal scorer, and he's a proven goal scorer as well. And he's having a decent season with Napoli, and Antonio Conte's getting a tune out of him. And it's not an accident. This always happens with United, that they can make these signings and they don't work out for one reason or another, and then later down the line you look at them in retrospect and people start to exercise a bit of revisionism and think, oh, actually he wasn't that bad, he was really good. I mean, but my opinion of Lukaku has not changed whatsoever. They absolutely should have sold him when they did, and they obviously they did. He didn't want to be there. United came to a point where they could offload him, But the mistake they made then, as has been the case this calendar year, is that they didn't sign a replacement. And then a year later, it's Edinson Cavani coming in. And people will start to get wistful about him as well because he had a purple patch towards the end of his first season. And they'll forget that actually he was telling the medical staff he wasn't fit enough to play and he was withdrawing from matches. And in his second season, he scored 2 goals. And whenever there was an international break, you knew he was not playing in the next game back because he'd probably still be in Uruguay. It's a worry that United, certainly since Lukaku, well, you could even go back to Van Persie, who was turning 30, I think, the season he joined United, or not too long after that. United's best strikers over the past 12 years or so have been in their 30s. If they've been strikers past their peak, whether it be Ronaldo in his first season back, Ibrahimovic in his first season, Cavani in his first season, they've just chucked money at the problem. And that has been one of many problems at the club, just chucking money at it, which is what they did even with Højlund, who was only 20 when he joined the club.
Yeah, absolutely. And 8 goals in 41 games this season, it tells you all you need to know. And only 3 of those obviously have been in the league.
Yeah.
You mentioned him earlier, Samuel. Harry Kane was obviously the player that sort of everybody recognised 2 summers ago as being the ideal solution. He was the nearest guarantee to goals you could have possibly got. For the money United could have spent on him then, even though Tottenham would have obviously played hardball over it, the money that United are going to have to spend this coming summer to sort of make up for the failures of Højlund and Zirkzee is going to exceed what they would have been able to pay for Kane, where at the time, if Kane had come in, Højlund probably would have been an ideal backup option, wouldn't he?
They were never going to sign both of them. They just wouldn't have had the funds to do that. They wouldn't have had the funds to have signed a goalkeeper, striker, and a midfielder if indeed they did go for Kane either. But it would have been the hit just say, okay, we won't have a midfielder this year. Let's look at our options. Okay, we'll try and get by, but at least we've got Kane up front, Fernandes behind him, Rashford to his left. And Rashford, of course, was just coming off the best season of his career, and Fernandes had a very good season as well. If they had Kane in that team, they'd have finished in minimum top 4 last season. I'm convinced. With all the problems that developed with United, they would have had a proven goal scorer, and they've obviously paid the price for that because they've got. I mean, they were bad enough last season. They are far worse this season. So I mean, we're on repeat here because I think a lot of us saw this coming at the time, and sometimes with a new signing, you have to reserve judgment because it can be unfair to write them off, and also you can look daft writing them off. But I don't think anybody in that room and in San Diego, when we were told that a deal had been agreed, I don't think any of us who cover the club thought United had got it right, paying 64 million, rising to 72 million pounds for a 20-year-old who was playing for Atalanta and had played for Sturm Graz and Copenhagen before that. Southampton were looking at signing Rasmus Højlund in 2022. And there's no point going over all that old ground because we've covered it chapter and verse about the fact that he moved to the SEG International Agency shortly before he joined United, and Kees Voss's influence whilst Erik ten Hag was the United manager. I just think that Højlund was destined to fail at United because of the circumstances in which he joined them, and his entry level had to be Javier Hernandez. It's a substitute striker coming into a team that have got 1 or 2 proven strikers, and you can learn your trade off them. And Hernandez cost £6 million in 2010. United committed to spending 12 times that amount on Rasmus Højlund. And I can confidently say Javier Hernandez was a better striker when he joined United. He was the same age as well. He was a 20-year-old. It's a completely valid comparison. It was just more bad recruitment by people who consistently made mistakes.
taking me back to my my childhood, mentioning Javier Hernandez there, Samuel. I'm getting the vibes of the black AIG kit with the blue V-neck on it. Great striker,
the chevron, yeah.
Yeah, great striker on his day, Javier Hernandez. Enjoyed watching him when I was younger. But Samuel, moving to the other end of the pitch, the other end of the team, we did get one element of a surprise yesterday. Luke Shaw back in the squad. I don't think we'd really got an expectation of that happening. Ruben Amorim had not mentioned him in the press conference on Friday. It sort of was geared towards Koy Mainu being the only player who could be back. He wasn't. Luke Shaw was back on the bench, didn't get on. But with potentially up to 12 games left in United's season, it's a chance for him to possibly stake a claim. But obviously, we've again, chapter and verse, we've gone over this a hell of a lot this season. Can't see anybody coming in for him this summer with an offer United to be willing to accept. I suppose it's a case of, if his body allows him to, prove himself that he's got something to show for Ruben Amorim.
Well, I think the luxury United have there is that there's so little resale value with Luke Shaw, who also turns 30 in the summer, and you look at his injury record. I think there would be clubs, if they were inclined to get him off the books, and I really do think that they should, just because of his salary. His salary and his injury record are two very good reasons why they should proactively look to try and get rid of him. And I suspect there would be a team out there that would pay either a frugal fee or take him on loan for a season and pay the majority of his wages. But football clubs, apart from United in recent years, it feels like football clubs are getting wise to any act these days. And even if Luke Shaw were to start every one of United's remaining games, which obviously he won't do, I don't think many clubs are going to think, we absolutely should look at getting him in the summer and giving Man United the best part of £10 million or anything like that. I mean, if United were to sell him, they'd be getting 7 figures at best. They wouldn't be. I don't think they'd even be getting close to an 8-figure fee for him. But I think it's in their interests that they try and get him off the books, primarily because of his salary. I mean, Ratcliffe mentioned that he's one of the top 8 highest earners at the club, which isn't a surprise given how recent his last contract was in 2023. And he's only got 2 years left on it. And I think with any player, when they get into the last 2 years of their contract, you have to start considering what decision you're going to make, or you make that decision. And with Shaw, the decision should have been made for United, and it should have been made quite some time ago. Is there a club out there that would want him next season, that would take him on, possibly with an obligation or an option to buy at the end of it? The PSR doesn't come into it because he was signed so long ago, so there's no danger of making a loss there. But do you really want Luke Shaw on more than £200,000 a week on the books for another year? From a PSR perspective, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And he's had so many chances at United to get his act together, to improve his fitness. He's been there 11 years this summer. I think it's safe to say that as good a player as he is on his day, and he's had some very good spells at United, and certainly for England at Euro 2020 as well, and even coming into the team for the Euros last year, he did quite well. But he has outstayed his welcome at the club. To have been there 11 years and to have been overtaken by Bruno Fernandes in the appearance list, which is what happened yesterday, when there's been a gap of 5.5 years between those players signing for the club. In fact, longer than that, technically. I mean, Shaw joined in June 2014. Fernandes joined in January 2020. That's a hell of a lot of time that happened between those two signings. I mean, how many general elections did we have during that time? Was it 3? I think 2015, 2017, 2019. there was a Brexit referendum. There was a US election as well. So so many world events that happened between those two players signing for Manchester United, and it's the one who signed most recently who's actually made more appearances for the club, which it doesn't reflect well on Shaw, and it's not all his fault, but the amount of times he's got injured, and I think a lot of goodwill among the supporters has eroded, to say the least, because he played for England at the Euros last summer, and then he went back to United and got injured, and he was out for the first 3.5 months, first 3.5 months of the season.
Yeah, it was Amorim's first game at Ipswich when he made his first appearance, I think, of
Yeah.
the season, and 2 further sub appearances since. And that yesterday was his first squad involvement since the 1st of December, I think it was, against Everton. So yeah, we'll see what happens on that particular score. But that does conclude part 1 of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Do rejoin us in part 2, where we'll look ahead to Thursday night's trip to Lyon. Welcome back to part 2 of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester is Red podcast. Samuel, as I've mentioned a few moments ago, Lyon up next on Thursday night, the first leg of this Europa League quarter-final. We build the Real Sociedad doubleheader as the most important game of United's season. We'll say it again, if United get through to the semi-finals, we all know what's at stake in this competition. That this, again, like the Sociedad second leg, this is the most important game of United's campaign so far.
Yeah, and that will be the case for the home leg as well, and it will be the case if they get to the semi-finals if they were to play Rangers or Athletic Bilbao. And we've known for several months now that the season rides on the Europa League in terms of whether it can be a success. It's mad to think that this season can overall be considered a success, but it is still possible. And United are I do think despite the recent results, they are in a better place in the Europa League than when they played Sociedad, purely because the squad is stronger. I mean, Kobbie Mainoo was at Old Trafford yesterday. You'd like to think that he will get into the squad for the trip to France this week. You look at that Newcastle match sandwiched between the two games. I mean, so is it on FIFA you can quit a game and you hit with a 3-0 defeat or something like that? That United would probably be well-minded to do that on Sunday, because I just don't see them getting anything out of that game against Newcastle. Newcastle are going to be ultra motivated. They think there's a rivalry with United because they came close to winning the league in 1996. They're going for the Champions League. They'll possibly occupy a Champions League place at kickoff. United have been gutless at St James's Park in recent years, pretty much since Eddie Howe came in as Newcastle manager. That is a game where Amorim might as well go into Jose Mourinho mode and just start tossing it off with the Premier League games, because why wouldn't you? There will come a point where he has to very, very clearly prioritise the Europa League matches. And Mourinho did that to the extent that he was starting Axel Tuanzebe for the first time. He was giving Scott McTominay his debut. He was playing Joel Pereira, Josh Harrop, Dimitri Mitchell, nearly giving Matty Willock a kick, bringing Angel Gomez on for his debut. That's how little he thought of United's running in the Premier League when United went all the way in the Europa League in 2017. And they've not got as many injury problems as they had back then. They started to really tot up in that run-in going back 8 years ago now. Whereas at the moment, United's squad looks reasonably and looks decent. Nick, I know there was still, Ahmad is the one who stands out, but there is still a hope that he'll play again this season. Okay, Johnny Evans hasn't started a game since Amorim's first match in charge, but he's a 37-year-old centre-back. I don't think he was, unless there was another defensive injury crisis, I don't think he was ever going to get much playing time in the run-in for this season. And he's not played since before Christmas, so that's kind of how irrelevant he is at the moment, as harsh as it may sound. But you look at the bench yesterday, even though the final 3 or 4 names, it was like, the squad numbers all of a sudden shot up into the 50s or the 80s or what have you. It did have more seniority on it than it has of late, and that should be, if you've got Mainu in the squad against Lyon in midweek, that's clearly another boost as well. I assume that Toby Collier was injured yesterday, as he wasn't in the squad. If he's back, that's another far more senior player than a few of the lads who were on the bench against City yesterday. But I look at this game and I don't think Lyon are a daunting side. I mean, they're in a much better league position than United are in Liga, but Liga is Liga. There's a reason why it's only got, I looked at the figures, I think it was in Ian Hawkey's piece in the Times last week about the rights holders out there have only hit a third of their target for subscribers, or something like that, because let's face it, who in their free time will be watching Liga football? It just doesn't, it's not appealed to anyone for a very, very long time.
No, I can't say it's ever appealed to me at all, to be honest with you, Samuel. I've got to be brutally honest with that one. You spoke to Andre Onana after the game yesterday. You mentioned earlier on that you were in the mix zone rather than speaking to Ruben Amorim in his press conference. And one of the key quotes that he insists United are way better than Lyon are. Interesting, bold. Could come back to bite him.
It could, if United go out to them. They, I think the screenshots of the headlines will be going viral. I suppose from United's perspective, you want players to be confident rather than timid. And Onana's a good character. He's a confident character, despite the trials and tribulations he's endured at United, and he still gets flack. And I can't quite understand it from supporters when he's got the ball and he's surveying the landscape and he's wondering what to do. I completely take the point that his distribution has been largely non-existent this season. He's certainly not showcasing it as we all expected he would do when he first signed for the club, and I think he did do that when he first joined the club as well. But it has been lacking in his game. But it sends us just to get the ball and get rid of it as soon as possible if it's not in the team's best interests. And he's managing the game the way he sees fit, and I wouldn't necessarily quibble with his judgment on that. I think that there was certainly, was it against Forest when, after he'd made the mistake against Gibbs White, they had a free kick inside their own half, and he needed like 3 or 4 goes to put it in the right position. It was in line with the linesman. That on that occasion, fair enough. If you're a fan, you're entitled to lose your rag with him at that point. So he touched upon that as well in terms of the impatience that is certainly audible when he has the ball. But he said he's not affected by that, which isn't a surprise for someone who's as experienced as he is and has played for as many big clubs as he has.
Yeah, obviously a Champions League final appearance on the CV, so a Europa League quarterfinal. You'd like to think he'll be able to cope with the demands of that quite comfortably. But Lyon, as you mentioned, Sammy, it's not the biggest club in the world. It's not one United should underestimate, of course. But this is a game again where United probably are going into it as strong favourites in terms of their overall magnitude and everything that comes with that. They should be getting the job done over 2 legs, you would like to think.
I certainly think they will do. And I mean, Lyon, as I said before, for I think people my age, you think Lyon, you think of the team who in the 2000s, before PSG became a state-owned club, they were the dominant side in Liga, and they did actually monopolise it in the 2000s. And they had some absolutely brilliant players. Michael Essien came through at Lyon. Mohamedou Diarra, I think, who ended up joining Real Madrid in 2006. The year after Essien, of course, went to Chelsea for big money. Jadinho, the free kick taker, was quality. Sidney Govou, I think, was playing for them at that time. Gregory Coupe, the goalkeeper. I'm probably reading off all these players, and a lot of listeners thinking, "Who the hell are these people?" But it's they're worth looking up. Flon Malouda was in their team as well. Eric Abidal, another one, just coming off the top of my head, and the most famous and the last Lyon player to score against Manchester United was Karim Benzema, who came up against someone he must have been about 20 or 21 in 2008, and the goal he scored against United, and it wasn't just against United; it was against Ferdinand and Vidic in their pomp. It was breathtaking, and you knew then that was someone who was going to be a world-class player. And the only shame is that United didn't sign him, because after that game in Lyon in 2008, Champions League tie, I don't think the footage even exists on YouTube. It's that rare. But I remember seeing it on the news the following morning. But Gerard Houllier had something to do with Lyon at the time. I don't think he was their manager. He might have been their technical director or something like that. But of course, Houllier, where was the former Liverpool manager? He was also he was pretty good friends with Sir Alex Ferguson. There was an established relationship there. I'm pretty sure Ferguson went to Houlier's funeral when he passed away. But in the tunnel afterwards, Houllier was there, Ferguson was there, and Benzema was there as well. And Ferguson, in quite a forceful way, was giving Benzema a United shirt. And you saw that at the time. You thought, well, I mean, it wouldn't happen now, but because the game has changed so much, and figures in football, whether they're players or coaches or managers, they're so sensitive to things like that or things getting out. But Ferguson was quite brazen about it. It didn't matter to him. That was his way of, like, he probably didn't know there was a camera there, but even if there was one there, he wouldn't have cared. That was his way of saying, I want this guy to be the next striker at Manchester United. And he did. And they couldn't get him in 2008. So they settled for Berbatov. And then unfortunately for them, the following year, Florentino Perez comes back in at Real Madrid. And it's another Galactico spree. And it's Ronaldo, it's Kaká. And it is, unfortunately for United, Karim Benzema. And I've said I remember even thinking at the time, Madrid wanted Ronaldo so badly. United should have just inserted a clause in that said, you don't go for Benzema, a no-go Benzema clause inserted into that. And I think that, if Madrid were out of the picture in 2009, then I think United would have been able to sign Benzema. And in the end, they signed Michael Owen and Gabriel Oberton. So I think Real Madrid got the better deal that summer.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree with that one. Just lastly, Samuel, to wrap things up, then looking ahead to Thursday, what sort of team selection, what sort of changes would you be hoping to see from Ruben Amorim going into this game? Is there anything that you think must be made from what we saw yesterday?
I don't want to see 8 defensive players in a team. I don't want to see 7 defensive players in a team, or even maybe 6. Casemiro's mini revival has primarily taken place in the Europa League, and I would understand if he started, but I think Casemiro and Ugarte is far too defensive minded, and there has to come a point where you've spent this money on Mason Mount. The manager loves him. Start him. He's got to get a start at some point. He's had a couple of substitute appearances now, and I think he should come into consideration. And going off the Tyrone Marshall rule, as I mentioned earlier, there's probably some logic in playing Zirkzee, just because he had a shot at goal against City and forced a save from the keeper. Højlund didn't even have a shot, did he? That's another concern, and it's not always down to. As I've always thought, it's a bit of a myth that he doesn't get the ball. There was that one time where, of course, Dalot, it was unforgivable that he didn't cross for him against Sociedad. That was glaring, but I think that has been overstated quite a bit. I think the problem is Højlund's movement.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens, and we'll obviously know of a travelling squad on Wednesday. and we'll bring that to you as soon as we get it. But that does mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever else you get your podcast from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. Myself and Samuel will be back again on Friday to reflect on the game against Lyon and look ahead to Sunday's trip to Newcastle. So make sure you subscribe for when that drops, and we'll catch you again later in the week for another episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show.